Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. And have to look through my old notes, and I realized it's been almost 2 years since I did a presentation for this user group. Almost to the day, but it was March 21st, not April 21st in 2021. I absolutely love questions. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, I really would like this to be interactive if you have the chance. So don't hesitate if there's anything you want to know about. And when I'm not here, I spend my days divided between consulting for customers from 400 people up to about 1,000 at the amount, so very different size of organizations, and I do a bit of training here and there. So we have an academy, it's an online academy where we do live trainings. They're not in person, also the last few years, but we do them live at least, and they're always up to date. So we have our master classes, we have 6-week-long courses that we do on popular topics, so Intune, config manager, and other things. And I've been doing this for a while. I started off on a blog post a while back, 30 years of imaging, and I started off when I was 16. Just in high school still, went down to a local computer shop after school, helped them put computers together and deploy them. That's how I started, and I kind of been doing that since. I love automation, and we'll come back to that a little bit more for the second session, but the first one is more or less a foundation to Windows Autopilot. And I have no idea what Michael Nias is doing here, but he knows more about Autopilot than most. He was part of that team for, was it 4 or 5 years? 4. Great, all right. So he's been part of that journey, and fun fact is what we see today, Autopilot is pretty much the same as we have been for the last 2 years. On that note, there seems to be a little bit of false advertisement sometimes about this. Autopilot is absolutely not imaging. It's a technique to enroll machines under management. In 11 out of 10 cases, that is typically Intune, at least in the customers I work with, but there are other platforms out there that does it as well, like VMware, Workspace ONE, and others. So the customers I work with are using Intune for this management, but it is just a technique to enroll devices. Someone better put Windows on that box, otherwise Autopilot is going to be very, very, very boring. And that someone could be you. You can continue to deploy as you always have. There are options now available, or have been available for a long time, for you to image devices and have them enrolled through Autopilot to your tenant. The more classic scenarios, the user-driven scenario where you have an OEM, Dell, HP, Lenovo. When you buy machines, you ask them license, hey, can you please enroll this device into the Autopilot service and flag it so it's been shown up in my tenant. So when I power on that device, it actually knows it belongs to me. And then it can also be a service partner that you work on behalf of you, helping you with imaging, have their own little warehouse with computers they deploy for you and then send it out to your various locations. But to set some sort of background to this, what Microsoft calls traditional deployment is basically old school imaging, where you deploy on premises. These days, it's also extended to cloud imaging, but you have your own image, you deploy it, you manage drivers, you manage applications, you do all of that. And then possibly later, you enroll that to a tenant or for management. Modern Windows deployment is Microsoft's term for having someone else do that for you. So still deployment, but someone else is doing it. So hopefully offloading a little bit of time on your end to focus on other things. Back in the days, and this is when Windows 10 was new. Fresh the summer of 2015, Microsoft came up with this great idea of provisioning packages. The initial idea was that you as an admin would bulk up on, say, 1,200 USB sticks. And you would create USB sticks with a package on them. And that package would have instructions on it to transform a device from a consumer device to an enterprise device. So basically, you would send down your employees down to Best Buy and say, hey, buy whatever you want and bring it back to the office. And when you power it on, you plug in this USB stick. And now we will convert that machine to be a managed device. And that was typically for on-premises management. So legacy Active Directory and all that stuff. But it will join the machine to the domain. It would apply a simple naming convention. You could have some policies. You can install some simple apps or scripts that you can run certificates and upgrade the SKU from Pro to Enterprise. Obviously, that didn't take off much because managing one USB stick per computer it's not that fun, really. So they took that concept, Microsoft, and put it on the cloud instead. That's how I see Autopilot or every type of similar technology where you have configurations in the cloud service somewhere, and when the machine boots up, it knows to read that information. To get this to work, you need to have some supported version of Windows 10, Windows 11. You need to have, surprisingly, internet access on those devices. And you need to have a shiny Azure Active Directory Premium 1 or Premium 2 license. That is pretty much the requirement for Autopilot. Now, the number one mistake I see organizations doing is forget to license the users to do this. And I'm guilty as charged. Many times I forgot. So I will show you a few tips that I've learned over the years to prevent that from happening. Yes?
Do the users have to have an Intune license as well, or is it only Azure AD?
They need to have an Intune license and they need to have an Azure AD Premium 1 or Premium 2 license.
Okay.
Obviously, if you're using something else than Intune,
But can Autopilot,
you can have VMware Workspace on deal with Autopilot, but I have done Silch in that area. I just heard that's possible, so all right, fine.
okay, so the Autopilot itself doesn't rely upon Intune, but somewhere in the process it gets handed over?
I'm not sure how it works with other vendors than Microsoft, but I'm assuming there is a connector of sorts between Azure Active Directory and whatever platform they're using.
Right.
Because that's technically what you have here as well between Intune and Autopilot. But what I've learned over the years is that it pays off a little bit to play around with this. Because Autopilot is depending on quite many different services to work. It's basically like the stars have to align and the planets need to be in that perfect sweet spot on the sky. Otherwise, Autopilot will fail. And there is a gentleman named Rudy Ohms. I know Michael has been presenting with him from time to time. I was going to do that upcoming MMS conference next month in 2 weeks from now in Minneapolis. But he has a blog, he calls it Call for Cloud. Oops, see if I can type. And he has a funny name of naming his blog post because he tries to find a matching movie title and then he replaces one of the words with whatever topic that is. So if you search his blog for Autopilot, you will find the man who knew Autopilot type of blog post. And this from last year, well, I saw my name there for a second. By the way, speaking of name, for those of you who happened to peek at my badge earlier, I'm apparently known as Hans today as well. Because that is my first legal name, and that is on the passport. But I've been known by Johan for the last 50 years. Anyhow, this blog post goes into detail and displays a little bit what the dependencies are for Autopilot to work. Because we are often quick to blame the Autopilot service, and it's rarely that service that is down. It's something else that service needs that is down. And it's per region that when these services seem to go down, at least that's in my experience. But there's a lot of things that have to align for Autopilot to function. For example, I was working with a customer in Australia earlier last year, and they were using Autopilot for all their students and all their imaging, and the service was down for 8 days for them in that region. No other region, but that entire APAC region that Australia happened to belong to. So one of my recommendations is, if you start to play around with this, have a plan B, because the service will be down at some point, or one of the depending services will be down at one point. So you need to come up with something that is helpful for that.
So on my blog, I put together a Autopilot Plan B, as I call it. It is basically using an old school provisioning package to enroll devices. We have customers that have this as their main enrollment technique when they need to enroll thousands of devices very, very quickly. It's a very elegant method of doing that. Because Autopilot is many things. Quick is not one of them. It takes a little while to have a good chunk of devices. You can expect at least half an hour total provisioning if you have a few apps coming down, etc. But Niehaus actually put together a blog post on how to generate these packages, and I was linking to that post in this post. But basically, you create a package, looks like this, a small. So we have extension. It's actually a WIM file, so you can just open it in 7-zip, and you can look at the inside of it if you're interested. Even modify it, even though it's not supported. But then you can take that package and add to your normal config manager sequences or MBT sequences. So you deploy as usual, but you tell it to, hey, go enroll while you're at it. So you can usually deploy and enroll machine in less than 10 minutes. So useful for large scale and useful when Autopilot does not cooperate fully with you. But other than that, when it does cooperate, I recommend spend some time learning how it works. And it can be as simple as having a few VMs that you enroll manually and just play around with it, learn how to troubleshoot it, learn where the different configurations are. So I figured we can do that. So let's see where I put that one. Here. Just need to check that I have a name available.
A few VMs.
So here I have a little PowerShell script. And it deploys Windows box in about 4 minutes. So I'm going to run that script so we have a machine we can play around with. It's going to be a Windows 11 one. You will go away. So I'm just going to run this script started, and then I'm going to explain what it does. Usually takes about 30 seconds to initiate, so the demo gods are with me.
You can hear sacrifice today?
No, but I've done, well, and yes, one of my hard drives gave up yesterday in one of my lab machines, so I call that the
That'll work.
advice. Anyhow, in the background, I'm deploying a VM with Windows, and I'm deploying it really, really fast. And the reason it's possible to do that really fast is obviously I'm cheating. So I have a virtual hard drive that I'm simply cloning. You can think this as a VDI template. But this is a virtual hard drive on which I've applied Windows 11 22H2 image. And the way I applied that was simply I borrowed, a WIM file from a downloaded ISO. So I have another little PowerShell script that will take an ISO and extract the WIM file I want to work with from it and put it in the folder. This script takes about 10 seconds to run, but I've already run that one, so I will have a WIM file in that folder. And then I have another script that takes that WIM file and apply it to virtual hard drive. And that looks pretty much like this. I specify the WIM file I want. I specify the index I want to work with or edition, and I specify the output file. So this was for a Windows 10 one. This one down here was for a Windows 11 one. But this is using a very common script. It's been around for a good decade. You have to use one of the newer forks of it because Microsoft has not been updated this one for years, but the community has. So anyhow, we download the ISO, extract the WIM file, apply to virtual hard drive, and that's what I'm using for my virtual machine deployment here. What I'm also doing is I'm using a few scripts. I totally blame NeoHouse on this one. But this particular PowerShell script is used to gather hardware information about the device so that you can upload that to your tenant. It works for most things, but the only thing you cannot do yourself, if you have Surface devices and you want to do, say, UEFI configuration through Intune, they have to be super shiny enrolled, not just Autopilot enrolled. It's called a high trust enrollment, and it's only CSPs that can do that. So you can't do that on your own, but you can tell Microsoft Support to do it for you if you need to. So if you're autopiloting services on your own, you may have to call support and have them do that piece for you. But for normal things, this works just fine. It gets the hardware hash. And you can actually learn quite a lot about that hardware hash, but I'll show that in a minute. I also have a script that removes some unattended files from the system because Autopilot doesn't support it, but I want to use it when I deploy my VM because I don't want to have to click through out-of-box experience once. And then I have a little unattended file that I'm using, and if I open up that unattended file, you will see that this is just a standard Windows answer file. I'm doing some auto log on temporarily, and then I'm running that script that I mentioned, and it outputs the result to the desktop of the device. I'm also injecting the computer name into the virtual hard drive, basically editing the unattended file on the fly, and then I create a virtual machine on it, and then I have a virtual machine. So now, if all goes well, I should have a virtual machine running. It's coming up in the last reboot, it looks like. But this is a regular Windows 10 machine. Now, what I need to do is to grab the hardware hash from this device. I need to upload that to my tenant. And there are a few things that needs to be done for this to work. Not too many, but a few. So, going back to licenses. Users in your organization, in addition to having a license, they must be allowed to enroll machines into your tenant. And they must be allowed to join machines into their Azure Active Directory. So if I go to my devices here, wait, thank you. And if I go to my enrollment, and if I log in with the right account, I will actually have access to it also. Also a requirement, when you do administration, you need to be an admin. Hey, David.
Hey, Johan.
I know you were excited about the Autopilot session.
Can't wait.
All right, going back to the old school devices view in Intune. I have a new shiny one that is in preview. Right now, thank you. So anyhow, in my enrollment settings, and you can reach this in other ways as well, but you can see that I have allowed two groups to allow two machines to be enrolled automatically. In a lab environment, it's perfectly okay to select all. But in production, you usually restrict it. And if you look at the groups that I selected, it's actually the same groups I used to assign licenses. And this way, I'm making sure that the user who tries to enroll is never out of license. So you don't have to do this. You can have separate groups, but this was a way for me to not mess up too much and have my demos work most of the time. Same if I go to Azure. Take a look at that, not that Azure, because that is my Windows Update for Business report, but this one here.
Whenever I'm trying to go to portal.azure.com, it takes me to edit some random group.
Yep, it's lovely, don't need that autofill. Anyhow, in my devices, in my device settings, this is also where I'm allowing certain users to join Azure AD. And I don't think it's going to be too big of a surprise for you seeing that that will be the same group or same two groups. The UI is different, but it is the same two groups. So that's something you need to do. And before moving on, I'm just going to check on the VM real quick. All right, this one is now deployed. And as you can see here, there is a little CSV file on the desktop. So if I open that with Notepad, we can quickly memorize the hardware hash and save that somewhere. But I see the serial number of the device, and I see this hardware hash here, which is basically that entire section at the bottom. That is an identifier of this device. And you can actually learn a lot about the device from this file alone. Michael here, he wrote a clever PowerShell script that allows you to peek inside of that hardware hash. If you go to his blog and search for Autopilot, there will be a lot of posts about Autopilot. But let's see, I believe it was this one here. So basically, he figured out how the hash is constructed and allow you with a touch of PowerShell and other things to extract the content from it. Maybe a little bit hard to see here, but it tells you a lot about your device. The model, the amount of memory, the disk, the network cards, their MAC addresses, and more things. So you can have this as your poor man's inventory if you want, because it does reveal a lot about the device. So anyhow, I have that hash. And what I've also have done in my tenant is that I have configured a few things specific for Autopilot. So to save some time, I'm going to upload the hash. So first of all, I'm going to borrow it from the virtual machine. Just going to flip it over to enhanced session mode so I can copy it. Copy that CSV file, go to the folder on my host. Review. Paste the new one in, and there we go. So I'm going to go to my tenant again, and I'm going to go to enrollment. And I will upload this CSV file. This you can do through PowerShell as well, if you want to automate that part. And we have even customers who do that as part of their deployment process. So they have a script that runs in the specialized pass in Windows, which is the first pass where Windows is up and being Windows after a deployment. And then they wait there until Intune is ready, and then they continue. Allows you to give more control of the process, because this sometimes can take a minute. It sometimes can take 7 minutes or 15, or timeout all completely. But anyhow, I will upload that CSV file. And as of late, I'm not sure what's been done. I have heard nothing about it, but import has been going much quicker than ever before. Assignments later has been going very much more quicker than before. I think someone found the turbo button somewhere in the data center and pressed it.
The turbo button.
But it's simply faster, and it's been for a month or two now.
Johan, they just knew you were demoing, so they sped up your tenant.
Okay. But I also see all the customers that I work with, so maybe they are that clever. Okay, that Johan guy again. Let's keep him quiet. Yeah. Anyhow, it will take a little while, and then that machine should show up in this list. And it will show up with a status of being not assigned. So I can't see it yet, so can't show it just this minute, but it will have a different status than the ones I already have. While that one is doing, okay, I can see it was imported. So let's do a refresh. Looks like we were lucky today. Here we are, we were lucky, because now we have one device that has the status not assigned. And if I check the serial number again of that device, this one here, sure enough, it was that device that I imported. So now I can go ahead and assign it to a group. But first, in my Autopilot setup, I have created at least one deployment profile. I have 6 in this environment, but they are configurations for the out-of-box experience for Autopilot. What scenario you want to work with and how the settings should be. So in this case, I'm using this one. It's a profile that will automate most things in the out-of-box experience. It will make the first user an admin. And I have no device template. I deal with computer names differently. But the user will be an admin. It's a user-driven scenario, and I'm doing an Azure AD join. And as you can see, I have assigned this profile to 4 different groups, but this is the interesting one. Autopilot devices, user-driven admin scenario. At the same time, I have an enrollment status page. This is what happens after the initial or as part of that same process, but the page shows up a little bit later. And this is where you can configure things like how long is it allowed to take? Well, in my environment, there's a deadline of 60 minutes. If it takes more than an hour, yes, give up. And I've also configured it to allow diagnostics to be collected. Recommend doing that. I have configured it to block the device until certain apps and profiles are installed. And in this case, I've added in some life-critical applications for me, Notepad++ and WinMerge. I use them a lot. Editors. But anyhow, I'm not allowed to use my device until these are installed. Now, to be successful or somewhat successful with Autopilot, do not install too many of these. It will break. If you do 100 deployments, you have 17 apps, 92 of them will work. 8 will fail randomly. So the key is to not deploy too much. If you have larger applications that you need to deploy quickly, like the entire Office package, for example, you can spin up local cache servers. If you have a larger office and you need to enroll en masse, and that will obviously speed up this significantly. But most organizations don't do that. But it is a possibility. Anyhow, and this one I have also assigned to that very group. Important to know is that these applications also need to be assigned to this group. You cannot just have them. It would be nice, but they have also to be assigned. If you need to do more massive things, you can, during Autopilot enrollment, you can work with config manager sequences. We have a few customers doing that. So they have a cloud management gateway set up, and as part of their Autopilot enrollment, they launch a sequence. And that sequence has one purpose, that it installs a bunch of applications. And it does that. So there are a few options there, but this is like the core scenario for Autopilot. So now, if I go back to my device.
Question, Johan?
Yeah.
Yeah, if a device has, say you have applications that are available to all devices, can it still pull, or does it have to be assigned to that specific group?
So the question is if apps are assigned to all devices, if it will still work here, I have no idea. I haven't tried. You happen to know, Michael? Should work. Should work.
I feel very confident.
So, I know assigning it to the same group works, so. Okay. But I mean, it's quite rare that you have a lot of apps deployed to all devices.
Yeah.
It's usually just company portal and something else, possibly. It's easy to test. And let me know if it worked. Anyhow, Where was I? Here. Gonna check on my device. Refresh. Not yet assigned. All right, fine. Gonna leave that be for a bit. So in the meantime, I'm gonna do what an OEM would do. I will clean up the device and I will send it off to whoever is supposed to have it. So I'm gonna go back to that VM and I'm going to delete the CSV file. I do not need the users to have that one. And I'm going to open up the command prompt or PowerShell prompt, terminal PowerShell. And I'm going to run the script that I injected during my deployment. I'm very proud of this script. It's a lot of work. Let's try this one more time. So, all right, PowerShell gurus in the room. Very impressed. This is it. Looking for N10 files. If it finds them, it deletes them. Fair enough. All right. So I'm going to run that script. And then I'm going to suspect the device. And I'm going to allow myself to run scripts also. All right. No, not undefined. One more time. Success. All right. Next one up, sysprep.
Isn't sysprep dead yet? Sorry.
It is not. Sysprep is not dead, to answer the question. It goes to back what I mentioned earlier. Someone needs to deploy Windows. And this is what an OEM would do. They would typically not bring up the machine in full Windows. They will bring it up in audit mode, which is like a fake full Windows state. But they will run sysprep and seal the device before they ship it away, because that's well, that's how you do it. So I'm going to generalize this, and I'm going to, yeah. Not sure why I selected reboot there, so I need to pay attention for this one when it boots up. But this one will prepare the machine for shipping away to someone. And when then power on that device, it will enroll into Autopilot, and we'll be able to see that. So while this one is running, I'm just going to go back and check on this one real quick. Still says not assigned. Sysprep typically takes about 4 or 5 minutes to run, depending on how much stuff you put on the device. But in real world, this is not a problem, because the vendor will do that in their factory and then send it away, that machine, with UPS or FedEx or something. And that takes more than 5 minutes. Not how many of you that frequently ship things in this country, but it can take a while. I actually had an interesting episode with UPS last year. So this is our backyard. Oops. This is their truck. Horses were very excited. The driveway is about 20 feet behind me. So they got stuck, obviously. So we had to get a tow truck in and drag them out of our pasture, basically. Pretty sure that was an Autopilot delivery. Anyhow. Let's see how that one is going.
Need to get a tractor.
They were able to, the tow truck person realized, I cannot go down there because I will get stuck as well. So it had a really long winch that it looped around 2 trees behind the stable, and were able to like slingshot him that way. I was like, hey, that was impressive. All right, sysprep seems to just finished up here. What I'm going to do right now, I'm going to ship this device very quickly to Liverpool. Using the roads.
Magic.
So I'm going to close this one, and hopefully that machine will reboot from a location that now have internet access, and it should show up as an Autopilot device. The only trick here, and I'm going to pause that just for 1 second. If this one process is not done, machine is going to miss that window. And it says it's not yet assigned. So I have to wait a little bit until I can finish up that process. So what we started to do, and I hinted on this earlier, is we started to put in safeguards in play. So we start to put in scripts. Let's see if I have an example here. Not there. So this is a script that connects the graph. It is, in this case, adding the serial number from the device that I was working on. And then this is a loop that I've added that will just sit and wait until that first import completed. That was the first task I did. And then I have another wait where I'm waiting for the sync to complete. And then I have another one where I'm waiting for the device to be found in Intune and loop until that happens. And then I have another one that waits for that assignment. And for most of the customers, we have allowing up to half an hour for that to complete, because usually it completes with half an hour. But we are waiting here, and we're showing up a splash screen to the user, basically validating enrollment. Sit tight, we'll give an update here when it's done. And then we take that output, we check every 30 seconds. So basically, when the machine is ready, we will inform the user back and say the device is ready, and the process will continue. But this was the only way we can get fully reliable Autopilot deployments, when we were also assigning and importing devices at the same time. In the UPS case, this is rarely a problem, because it will take them time to deliver the device. But when you guys do this on your own, controls like this are important. And one thing is that you can also do other stuff. You can have your own custom computer naming if you want. You don't have to use the naming templates that come with. You can tell Autopilot what the device name is supposed to be through scripts. And on that note, up on one of my GitHub repositories, not sure how well this link will show, but with Zoom it will do the trick, I think. I have an Autopilot folder. So GitHub, Performance Research, and under there you will find Autopilot. And this is just a collection of all the scripts I'm using when playing around and testing the different Autopilot scenarios. I've found that this is more or less a lifesaver in terms of playing around with things. Right. I can see how the service behaves. This one. Not yet assigned. And I'm an idiot. Had I been waiting for this, we'll be waiting for a long time. I have a profile assigned to a group. I have an enrollment status page assigned to a group. Did I add the device to the group? I didn't want to add the device to the group. Okay, it's going to be really hard for that group to pick up that device. Anyhow, groups. Autopilot This was the group that I have assigned all my stuff to. And members, I'm going to add in that serial number. This device here. And even if I do a direct member, it's going to take a little bit for it to update. Don't get me started on dynamic groups because they can take a really long time, but direct memberships are often quick. I mean quick, as in less than 2 minutes.
You know, what's funny about those dynamic groups, I've been using some lately, and they're updating within like 5 minutes. I kid you not, like the device provisions and it's on Azure AD, and within 5 minutes, it's in the dynamic group.
It depends.
I've never seen it that fast before, but
I also found the turbo button for that one apparently.
yeah.
But there was an amazing session last October. It was part of the technical takeoff that Microsoft did. It was a 4-day event, free for anyone to join in and check. See if I can find that. Must be this one. One of the first days there was yes, this, where the team behind that dynamic membership talked about everything that went on behind the scenes, how it did and what you guys can do to speed up the process. They talk about concepts like pre-warming up groups with devices so that they evaluate much quicker. Just a half-an-hour session. It's available on YouTube, of course. All these sessions are, but I highly recommend it. So if you didn't have a chance to watch that one, it was a good one for sure. So. But now when I have my device in my group, you can go ahead and see the status. That was quick. It changed from not assigned to assigning. This usually takes 20 minutes in the past. It was almost immediate. So I'll wait for that one to finish. While that one is thinking about it, there are a good chunk of other scenarios available for Autopilot. If you like to troubleshoot a lot, that's your passion in life, I recommend this scenario. This is royally painful to deal with. Simply because there are so many moments or things that have to align for this to work. Should you ever need to do this, think about a time frame it will take you. 4 days. And then you find a multiplier, 20. And you'll be close. How long time will it take you to get that to work? I've seen organizations spending months getting hybrid Azure AD joined through Autopilot to work reliably. Should you ever need to do it, I decided to do a collection of resources after my first journey with this myself. Hybrid. So it's just a link collection of things. And the most important one is the first one. Why you shouldn't be doing it. Because Rudy put together a blog post 2 years ago that came out of a thread that ran over Twitter for almost 2 months during that summer. In between hundreds of people just commenting on why you may or may not want to do this. So if you haven't read that post, highly recommend doing that. And then if you still need to do it, there are good chunk of resources on how to get it going. The challenge is there are so many, I mean, think of it this way. You want to join a machine to a domain. It's on the internet. You are at the local Starbucks here in Bellevue. you have only internet access, and somehow you manage to convince them to give you good internet access. And you want to join your domain controller, your legacy Active Directory. I don't think that one is visible, or network-wise, we can connect to that from Starbucks. I would be very surprised. So you need to figure out a way to do that line of sight connection to it. And the only way you can do this is to set up multiple connectors between Intune and your legacy Active Directory. And then you need to configure a hybrid Azure AD Join profile in Intune, so that when your device boots up, realize it's supposed to do some Autopilot magic, it's going to get instructions and say, hey, you know what? You're supposed to join the domain. So Intune will organize or orchestrate an offline domain join operation. Contact the local domain controller through the connector, get that object back, send it down to the client so that the client can start the process. Then it will continue that work, enroll into Intune, and starts to install applications. Which application do you think it would be wise to have installed quite early in that process?
VPN.
The VPN client would be good, because the client is going to use that VPN client to connect eventually to your local Active Directory, assuming everything has been synced in between by then. And establish a connection without username and password, a machine-based connection. And usually, if you talk to your security folks and say, hey, yeah, I know we have a VPN set up here. I was thinking that all devices could just authenticate on their own. Usually frowned upon. But that's a requirement for Autopilot Hybrid to work. So I see customers that is putting a lot of scripting in to make sure devices are ready, objects are synced, etc., as part of the enrollment process. It's doable, it's just royally painful. Anyhow, going to go back here, take a quick look. This is assigning, so we're going to give that a little more time. Now, another scenario I found interesting, and we use this a lot, is support for existing devices. It means that you guys deploy Windows and have them enroll into Autopilot that way. And that can be done in two ways. The one I showed you earlier, where you put in scripts that will register a device, pretty much like I did manually in the console, but through PowerShell. Another option is to borrow one of those profiles and tell the deployment solutions to inject them at deployment time. So here I have a little PowerShell script. Using one of the older modules, but that works just fine for those guys. And I'm going to connect to Microsoft Graph. That's the automation framework behind Autopilot and for building other things in Azure and Intune. In this case, I'm lazy. I'm just prompting for credentials. The other script that I showed you actually had a service account in it, so to speak. It's a Azure application registration that have just enough permissions to do what needs to be done, and I'm using the script or authenticate the script using that one. But in demo environment, it's okay to ask for it also. Anyhow, this little magic line, get an Autopilot profile, not very surprisingly, lists the profile that I have in my tenant, but through Graph. And then I can download that one and save it as a JSON file with encoding ANSI, meaning ASCII. So shorthand version is, I run this little snippet here. I have a text file here. I open that text file. You can see it is my deployment profile, but in text. So I downloaded a profile, more or less. You would think that going to profiles here and hit export would do the trick. No, that will export what you see on the screen right here, not the actual profile. Anyhow, go back and check my client. Worst case, I'll go back to that in the second session here. Hey, it is now assigned. So let's power on that device again, or resume the path that I had for it.
Johan, quick question for everyone really quick.
Sure.
So we're working on a lunch order for pizza today. Does anyone want salad with their pizza? Okay. Anyone else? Will people eat salad if it shows up? Okay. All right. Thank you.
You helped everyone. Wonder what state this machine turned out to be in. Worst case, it can be restarted and it usually picks up where it left off with the pilot registration, but we'll see. I'm gonna give this one a healthy turn off, power it on again. This one is now in Liverpool.
You mentioned Surface devices being special, and I know, yes, today or maybe yesterday, they released a firmware update for the Surface Go 2 to enable Autopilot, which I wonder, do devices have to have something in the UEFI to allow Autopilot to work? I'm just wondering, I mean, what did they do to enable this device to be UEFI or to be Autopilot, you know?
I don't know about that because Autopilot has been available for Surface devices since Autopilot came.
But I mean, they released the firmware, but the only thing it calls out is like, this device is now able to use Autopilot. And it's,
I would assume it gets the bug fix of some sort.
okay, so there isn't something that has to be there to enable Autopilot to work, I mean, from a device? Okay,
Not that I know of.
Okay.
You know, Michael?
No, but there were various bugs that required specific updates.
Yeah. I remember back in 1903 of Windows 10, they started to allow updates of Autopilot things in Windows outside of the normal update cycle for Windows. So basically, sometimes when you enroll devices in Autopilot, you can see it's installing updates. These are not your patch Tuesday updates. These are updates for Autopilot. When they fix something and just have that one come down and become available. Because prior to this, it would have to take to the next version of Windows until they could provide a fix for a bug, which was quite annoying for a cloud service. Especially when vendors sometimes were shipping older versions of Windows also. You order them with Windows 10. Yeah, okay, which Windows 10?
right.
And you may have got an older version.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a challenge, you know, sometimes we buy devices and they sit in a box for a year before we actually deploy them. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, you could run Autopilot, but you also want to get the latest feature update and, you know, so, yeah.
Yeah, that is definitely a problem, leaving devices behind too long.
Right. Or if you order them and they've been sitting at the manufacturer for a year before they ship them to you, you know.
See if this one comes up in the Autopilot or out-of-box experience view, if you're lucky. Something you always can do here at this point is you can press Shift F10. And you get a command prompt that you can use for troubleshooting. So you can open up the event log, you can run PowerShell diagnostic scripts for Autopilot. There is a gentleman in Denmark, Matthias Malkersen. He is providing a Intune debug toolkit. Highly recommend to take a look at that one. It's just a series of solutions from the community, and some of them are for Autopilot. But for example, there are scripts that you can run that verifies that you can connect to all the stuff that you're supposed to be able to connect to for Autopilot to work. Because that's also a common issue, that the machine simply cannot reach resources because they're using a proxy or something. So it's a great resource, open source, free for everyone. Anyhow, this one now came back online. A little bit hard to see, but it shows my little logo. Deployment Artist is one of our brands that we have under Mirrorless. By Monster is another one. But it's ours. I can tell it's ours. So I can now log in as Frank. And for the password. And if stars aligns, it will be enrolled. It will get the applications installed, and we should be back at the desktop within maybe 10 minutes or so at most. When was the, I'll get to you in a second. When was the coffee break for in between the two sessions?
About now.
About now, all right. I'll take your question first, then coffee.
Does that login support two-factor, or is it only limited to username and password for Intune?
There is some integration with Windows Hello that we can have as part of the enrollment process, but it's not something I have done. You happen to know, Michael? MFA here.
Or you want to turn it off. Because it's going to follow whatever your Azure AD settings are.
So basically your conditional access settings. Okay. Yes. But anyhow, let's just leave them running and we'll check on it after the break. So yeah, coffee, and I'll see you in 15 minutes.
Thank you. It could be mute button there for listening to listen to this.
See it on the screen here?
Yeah.